He painted his own soul into every canvas. The mirror had been selling it for centuries. There's an old anxiety at the heart of portraiture, older than photography, older than oil on canvas, that a perfect likeness of a person contains something of them, something essential. The ancient Egyptians built their funerary art around this belief, that the image sustains the soul, that the painted face is not merely a record, but a vessel. Most people find this charming, folkloric, the kind of belief we keep at a comfortable distance by calling it superstition. Elias Morrow did not find it charming. He found it eventually true, though by then he had sold enough of himself to make the discovery largely academic. Tonight, we follow a painter who built his reputation on self-portraits, who found his reference in a 17th century obsidian mirror he believed to be a prop, and who began to notice, only very late, that the face looking back at him from that mirror was not quite the face he remembered having. What lives in the glass is very old. What it has been doing to Elias is very simple. And what it has been selling to his buyers is not art. Elias Morrow had been painting self-portraits since graduate school, which his professors had called narcissism dressed as introspection, and his collectors had called, with considerably more enthusiasm, deeply affecting work. By 36, he had a studio in Baltimore's Station North neighborhood, a reputation that crested just below famous and well above comfortable, and a growing unease about his own face in the mirror that he had been attributing for 3 years to the natural anxiety of a man whose entire career hinged on the quality of his own image. The obsidian mirror had come from an estate sale in Fells Point. The estate belonged to a family that had accumulated over several generations an extraordinary miscellany of antique objects, none catalogued, all priced to move. The mirror was oval, set in a pewter frame of considerable craftsmanship, a series of interlocking figures that might have been angels or might have been something else, depending on which angle caught the light, and its surface was not reflective in the conventional sense. It returned your image darker, more distilled, the shadows in your face deeper, the highlights more precisely placed, as though it were not so much reflecting you as interpreting you. Elias paid $200 for it and set it in his studio for reference. The first painting he produced using the mirror sold in 4 days, online at 3 a.m. for $4,800 to a buyer in Zurich. The buyer's name was listed as a holding company. Elias didn't think much about this. Work sold. Work had never sold this quickly, but he attributed it to a new online presence his gallery had been building. The second painting sold overnight, the third within hours of posting. He began working every day, which was unusual. He was characteristically slow, prone to months of inactivity between productive periods. But the mirror made him quick. He would set up in front of it in the morning and find, within minutes, that he had a clarity about his own face that he had never achieved before. Every angle precise, every shadow honest, every line of exhaustion or anxiety or age reproduced without flattery or evasion. The results were, even he could see it, extraordinary. His best work, his most alive. The emails from buyers began arriving in the 3rd month. The first was from the Zurich holding company, or rather from a human being affiliated with it, a man named Henrik, who wrote in careful English and apologized for the intrusion and asked, with a polite urgency that Elias found strange, whether the figure in the first painting had always been positioned with its right hand raised. He had hung the painting in his study, he explained, and he was quite certain this morning, looking at it before his meeting, that the figure's right hand was raised when it had not been raised when he collected the painting. He wondered if perhaps he had image blood. He apologized again. He asked Elias not to reply if it was nothing. Elias looked at the photograph of the first painting that he kept in his own files. The figure's right hand was at its side. He filed Henrik's email in a folder and did not reply. Over the following 6 weeks, he received 14 similar communications. The figure was smiling when it hadn't been. The figure had moved closer to the edge of the canvas. The figure was standing when it had been seated. One buyer, a woman in Seattle named Cora, sent a photograph at 2 a.m., a phone camera image of the painting in her darkened living room. The figure pressed almost flat against the inner surface of the canvas from the other side, its face distorted by the pressure of its own forward motion. Mouth open, expression entirely unlike anything Elias had painted. He took the obsidian mirror off its stand and put it in the storage closet. He had not painted in 3 days before he took it back out. The need was physical, urgent, nauseating in its quality, the creative necessity of a man who has been productive for months and stops suddenly, multiplied by something that was not creative necessity, that had a flavor he didn't have language for. He set the mirror back up. He told himself it was superstition. He painted. The hollowing had been happening since the first session. It is the nature of the Meridian Glass, which is the mirror's name in the 3 texts that document its history, none of which Elias had read, to function as an astral lathe, a face brought before it with creative intention, with the focused desire to reproduce and project the self, becomes the instrument of its own fracture. Each sitting shaves a quantifiable layer from the sitter's animating principle, their soul, their essential self, and deposits it in the reflected image, which deepens and complexifies with each session. The finished painting is not a reproduction of the sitter. It is a container for what was taken, a portion of the sitter themselves, sealed in oil and linen and distributed to a buyer who will hang it on their wall and never fully understand why it makes them feel, sometimes, that they are being watched. The mirror had been doing this since 1683. The entity that inhabited it had been accumulating fragments for 340 years. Elias noticed the first physical symptom in month 5, a quality of lightness. Not physical lightness, his weight was unchanged, but a sense of insufficiency, as though the space he occupied in a room was slightly less than it should be. People stopped noticing him in crowds. A barista he had visited every morning for 2 years did not recognize him. His gallery director called to check whether he was ill, then seemed unable to remember, halfway through the conversation, why she had called. He began researching the mirror. The pewter frame's figures, photographed and run through an art historical database, were identified by an academic at Johns Hopkins as a form of 17th century alchemical notation, a binding sequence that, the academic noted with the mild alarm of someone who deals in dry archival materials, had been specifically used to contain entities of uncertain classification within reflective surfaces. She sent him 3 PDF articles and a note that read, "I'm not sure where you acquired this object, but if the frame is original, you should probably not use it as a mirror, just as a general precaution." He looked at the obsidian surface for a long time. His reflection looked back. It looked well, healthy, vivid, more present than he felt. He understood, in the way that understanding arrives when it has been deliberately avoided for a long time, that the image in the mirror was no longer him. It had not been him for quite some time. It had simply been maintaining the appearance of him, because the appearance was necessary for the work to continue. The final portrait was not planned. He sat before the mirror on a Tuesday evening in November, intending to pack it for shipment to a researcher in Prague who had offered to take it off his hands for a sum that would have been generous in any other circumstance. He sat before it and looked at his face. His face, the real one, the one that had been growing thinner and quieter and less substantial for 8 months. And he understood that there was not enough of him left to pack a box, that the physical mechanics of wrapping an object and addressing a label required a presence he no longer fully had. He picked up a brush. He painted what he saw, not in the mirror, but with his actual eyes, in the actual studio, the face that remained in the world with him, his own face as it now was. He painted it screaming, not as a choice. The face was screaming because that was what it was doing. In the mirror, his reflection sat perfectly still, calm, well rested, wearing his skin with the ease of something that has been wearing it, in one form or another, for a very long time. It smiled at him when he finished. It had his smile. His exact smile, the one he had brought to the mirror in the first session in good faith, in the genuine desire to see himself clearly. The painting sold that night before he had finished the sizing. The buyer was the same Zurich holding company. The price was not listed in the confirmation email, only a note that read, "The collection is nearly complete." Elias Morrow was found in his studio 3 days later by his gallery director, who had grown genuinely concerned when he stopped answering calls. He was sitting in the chair before the mirror. He was breathing. He was present in every physical sense. But when she spoke to him, and when he turned to look at her, there was a quality in his eyes that she would spend the following years failing to describe accurately. Not blankness, not vacancy, but a kind of depth that went the wrong direction. As though she were looking into him and finding where the self should be, only a very well-maintained exterior, and behind it, receding infinitely, a darkness that was not frightening so much as it was very, very old. The mirror stood in the corner of the studio. In the obsidian surface, a figure sat in a chair and looked at a woman with warm, intelligent, recognizable eyes. The figure had been in the mirror since 1683. It had escaped once, briefly, into the body of a Flemish painter who had used it as reference for his own portraits. The painter had served his purpose and been vacated, and the entity had been returned to the glass by a Jesuit scholar with more knowledge than survival instinct. But now it had, across 8 months and 23 paintings, distributed itself among 23 buyers on 4 continents, 23 fragments, 23 vessels, a distributed existence, housed in oil and linen on 23 walls. When the last buyer hung the final painting, the screaming portrait, in a room in Zurich, All 23 paintings turned to face the center of their respective walls. The mirror in Baltimore was empty. A 17th century alchemical binding sequence, photographed and identified by an academic at Johns Hopkins, who sent the artist a polite note saying, "Just as a general precaution," and Elias read it. He understood what it meant. And he sat down in front of the mirror anyway, because the work was extraordinary, because the work had never been this good, because the hollow feeling was abstract and the vividness of the painting was right there in front of him. This, I think, is the real horror. Not the mirror's mechanics, which are ruthless but legible, not the entity, which is simply very old and very patient and very thorough, but the fact that Elias knew, at some level, what was being taken. That the lightness should have been alarming. That a barista who had served him every morning for 2 years, not recognizing him, should have constituted a crisis. He kept painting. What strikes me about the entity's final arrangement, 23 fragments distributed across 23 walls in 4 continents, is its elegance. It doesn't live in the mirror anymore. It lives in the buyers' homes, in their studies and living rooms and bedrooms, watching, growing whole, piece by piece, from the fragments of a painter who believed he was simply making his best work. The mirror is empty now. Elias is still breathing, still maintained. An exterior with no interior, sitting in a chair in a Baltimore studio. His gallery has his next show scheduled for March. Thank you for joining me tonight. My name is Ilara, and I am your whisperer. I'll be here, waiting for you next time. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below. I want to hear your stories. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more. This has been Karma Quietly Whispers. See you soon.